this was a classical colonial.
Okay, gusto ko lang ipuntos, no? Ang Zionism movement po was created and was founded and created po sa Britain, mga suki, no? Sabi po ni Professor Abi, quote and unquote, no? Okay, Zionism movement, political Zionism movement was, okay, founded and created in Great Britain, mga kababayan, no? Okay, so yan na. Okay, pakinggan natin, no? Okay. Sige.
Yeah. Document. In 1917, the Jews were 10% of the population. Yeah. The Arabs were 90%. The Jews owned 2% of the land. And yet, Britain chose to allocate national rights to the Jewish minority and to deny it to the Arab majority. Right. And it was this British commitment and support for the Zionist movement that enabled the connect.
Okay, parang dito sa Pilipinas, ang Palestino po ay 90%, majority sila dyan po sa bansang yan. Okay, 10% lang po ang mga Jewish, itong mga Hudyo, Jews, mga kababayan, no? So binigyan ng authority po ng British government, kaya nga okay, ganun lang. Okay, maliit lang ang kanilang kayamanan po, mga suki ng mga panahon niya, no? So dahil po sa tulong po ng British government, okay, naging ganoon na po, mga kababayan, ng situation doon, no? Can you imagine 90%? Okay, ng mga Palestinian citizen, tao, kasi wala silang citizen. Ang mga stateless po ang Palestinian, mga kababayan, no? O, ganoon na po kalakas nila ngayon, mga suki, mga kababayan. Okay, dahil sa tulong po ng British government, no? So, ipagpatuloy natin, no? Tapusin natin ito. Kahit pa mga 2 oras, okay lang, mga suki, no? Ayan. Sige.
Female voice, male voice, lolly voice.
Okay, kaya kung di ako kampihan po ni UN Secretary General Antonio Gutierrez, ay ewan ko na lang, mga suki, mga kababayan, no? Ayan. Kailangan na kampi sa akin po si, okay, UN Secretary, okay, Antonio Gutierrez. UN Secretary General Antonio Gutierrez, mga suki, no? Okay. Sa mga programa natin ito, ay grabe po, mga kababayan. Ayan.
The Zionist movement to embark on the systematic takeover of Palestine, a process that continues to this day with the expansion of Jewish settlements on the West Bank. So there was an Arab community, well-established, well-rooted Arab community in Palestine, going back centuries before the rise of Zionism and the State of Israel. One argument about Palestinian nationalism is that it's not genuine nationalism. It only developed in response to the Zionist project in Palestine. But there is nothing unusual about it. Most nationalisms are not positive movements. They arise in opposition to something else. So the Palestinian nationalism is nothing unusual, and it really took off the ground in the aftermath of the First World War, but it's still a very genuine.
Okay, palagay ko matanda-tanda rito si Professor Abi, no? Okay, si Lain. Okay, ako matanda-tanda rin. Ang edad ko ngayon, 66. Sa kanya, mga palagay ko ito, mga 80 na ito mga suki, no? Okay, so wala nang halaga ang buhay namin, mga kababayan, no? Ayan. So matanda-tanda rin na siya, and then ako matanda-tanda na rin, kaya matapang po parinig ng mga ganito, no? Okay. Sige, Professor Abi.
National movement, and the PLO used to represent the national movement, and Hamas today is the main representative of Palestinian nationalism and resistance to the occupation.
So you've raised there the Balfour Declaration. This was a letter written by Arthur Balfour, the Foreign Secretary in the then coalition government in the United Kingdom. Why did Britain give such an open promise for a Jewish homeland? What was their ultimate motivation behind that?
I believe that the Balfour Declaration was based on a misperception, on a mistake. And the driving force behind the Balfour Declaration was not Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour, but Prime Minister David.
Okay. Sabi po ni Professor Abi, misconception and mistake. Ang declaration po ng itong agreement na yun, no? Darfur? Darfur ba yun? Okay. Sige mga kababayan, no? Okay, misconception and mistake. Ayan.
Lloyd George. David Lloyd George believed that the Jews were a uniquely influential people, that they had covert power, that they made the wheels of history turn.
Okay, pinaka-influential po mga tao ito, no? Itong mga Hudyo po mga kababayan. Napaka-influential po itong mga tao ito sa daigdig mga kababayan, no? Sa mga leader, sa mga world leader, ay napaka-influential po ang grupo po ng Hudyo. Okay, mga Jews mga kababayan, no? Okay, dahil kine-claim nila talagang magaling sila mga suki, itong mga tao ito, no? Magaling silang tao. Okay? Favorite po ng mga US, okay, UK, European, okay, pinaka-favorite nila itong mga Hudyo mga kababayan, no? Dahil po sa katalinuhan. Ayan. Sige. Si Professor Kwan na magsabi yun, no? Professor Abi. Ayan.
And by issuing this declaration, Britain would gain a strategic partner in the war against Germany. This view in itself was anti-Semitic, that the Jews enjoyed covert financial power around the world, that the Jews were so influential.
Okay, may i-release mo ang ABC News sa US, no? Mayroon daw shooting incident sa Uvalde. Saan bang Uvalde sa US, no? Prime DOJ Uvalde shooting report. Okay, migrant brace for renew. Okay, no? Hindi natin ma-accommodate na yan. Parang breaking news, no? Okay, sige po.
But it was an exaggeration. But the truth of the matter was that the Jews were a minority in Britain and everywhere, and the Zionists were a tiny minority within the Jewish community in Britain. Yeah. And it's really important to understand that the mainstream Jewish community in Britain was opposed to Zionism. There was only one Jewish member of Lloyd George's government, and that was Sir Edwin Montagu, the Secretary of State for India. And on the 23rd of August 1917, 3 months before the Balfour Declaration was issued, Montagu submitted a memorandum, 4-page memorandum, to the British cabinet under the heading the anti-Semitism of the present government. And this is the first and major Jewish statement against Zionism. And Montagu began by saying, Judaism is a religion, it's not a nation. There are Jews who live all around the world, they speak different languages, they have different cultures, and therefore it doesn't make sense to have a Jewish state in Palestine. Moreover, if there is a Jewish state in Palestine, it would undermine the struggle for equal rights for Jews in this country and in Europe and everywhere else. Because if there is a Jewish state in Palestine, anyone who didn't like Jews will say to the Jews, if you don't like it here, why don't you go to your own country? So this is a very important and little known document which shows that the Jewish community as a whole, the mainstream, did not support the Zionist project. And the Balfour Declaration, when viewed not from the Zionist side, but when viewed from the point of view of British interest, was a colossal strategic blunder. Because it alienated the Arabs, it alienated the Muslim world, and if Britain had wanted a strategic ally, then it should have been the Arabs, who were already its ally during the First World War. But Britain was very cynical, and in the course of fighting the First World War, Britain made 3 incompatible promises. In 1915, it promised Hussein the Sharif of Mecca, in return for mounting an Arab revolt against the Ottoman Empire, they promised him an independent Arab kingdom under his rule at the end of the war. The following year, in 1916, Britain signed a secret treaty with France, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, in which the colonial powers divided the Middle East into zones of influence between themselves. So this clearly contradicted the promise of an independent Arab kingdom. But they couldn't agree on Palestine, so Palestine was not in either sphere of influence. It was to have a separate international administration. But worse was to come. In 1917, Britain issued the Balfour Declaration, pledging its support for the Zionist cause. Now, the difference, and Britain completely let down the Hussein the Sharif of...
Okay, itong tao ito no, Professor Abi, isang historian mga suki, no? International lecturer. Ayan. Okay, sandali lang. And then balikan po natin si Professor Abi. Okay.
monster voice, female voice, male voice, lolly voice.
Okay, pagpatuloy po natin pag-aaral natin, parehas tayo mag-aaral ng kasaysayan po ng daigdig mga kababayan, no? Okay. Ayan.
America and reneged on its promise of an independent Arab kingdom. But there is a difference between the Sykes-Picot Agreement and the Balfour Declaration. The Sykes-Picot Agreement was never implemented. Lloyd George reneged on it, but the Balfour Declaration was implemented. And in 1922, it was Britain which wrote which incorporated the Balfour Declaration into the League of Nations mandate in Palestine. So what had been a vague British promise to the Zionists became an international instrument, and Britain had as the mandatory power to help the emergence of a national hope for the Jews in Palestine. The Sykes-Picot Agreement and the Balfour Declaration are the guiding themes, the central themes of Arab nationalists to this day. They are still relevant at a symbolic level. The Sykes-Picot Agreement was a symbol of colonial indifference to Arab rights and Arab aspirations. It was a symbol of the colonial powers carving up the territory for their own selfish ends. And the Balfour Declaration represents, is a symbol of the European colonial powers introducing a foreign body, a Jewish state, into the midst of the Middle East. And Arabs to this day believe that this was deliberate, to create a Jewish state in the middle, in the heartland of the Arab world, in order to divide and weaken the Arabs, and in order to defeat Arab nationalism. I'd like to make one other point,
Please.
if I may.
Yes.
The League of Nations mandate for Palestine was unique. There were 4 mandates.
Yeah.
The League of Nations gave France the mandate for Syria and the mandate for Libya, for Lebanon. And it gave Britain 2 mandates, the mandate for Iraq and the mandate for Palestine. All the 3 mandates, Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq, called on the mandatory power to prepare the country for independence, for self-rule, and when the country was ready, to hand over power to the locals. The Palestine mandate was different because the Balfour Declaration was incorporated into the mandate. Britain was now obliged to turn Palestine into a national home for the Jewish people, not to prepare the locals for self-government, but to prepare Palestine to be taken over by Jews from all over the world, and especially from Europe. In this sense, the Palestine mandate was unique, and that encapsulates the deep injustice, the fundamental injustice that the British mandate involved towards the local population.
So can I ask you about David Lloyd George? He was the Prime Minister at the time, and he's known to be an ardent Christian Zionist. How much did his religious views impact his attitude, I suppose, towards Arabs and ultimately towards the Balfour Declaration and the creation of a Jewish state.
David Lloyd George had biblical education, which he used to invoke in relation to foreign policy. He knew all the biblical names for present-day Palestine, and he said that he was influenced by his sympathy for the Jewish people to issue the Balfour Declaration. But I completely dismiss this as irrelevant.
Yeah.
David Lloyd George was a radical at home, but he was an old-fashioned British imperialist abroad and a land grabber. And all his decisions relating to the Balfour Declaration were cynical imperial calculations. But he was wrong about the influence of the Jews. And Britain was saddled with this commitment to a Jewish national home, which really hobbled Britain in the interwar period and soured its relations with the Arabs. So it's not just David Lloyd George. There is a view that biblical romanticism was the driving force behind the Balfour Declaration. And it may have existed in British society.
Okay, ano yung term niya? Okay, romanticism? Religious romanticism? Okay, no? Religious romanticism.
In general, but it wasn't a serious motive for the British policymakers. Right. And therefore, I completely reject the notion, which is still persistent to this day in some quarters, I completely reject the notion that the Balfour Declaration was a noble Christian project to enable an ancient people to rebuild its national home on its ancestral homeland.
And can I ask, I mean, your wife is the great-granddaughter of David Lloyd George. What's her views on the Balfour Declaration, but also on Palestine today?
My wife is a great-granddaughter of David Lloyd George, and she's very proud of him and his radical agenda and his radical achievement in home affairs. But she's extremely embarrassed by the Balfour Declaration, and she is a pro-Palestinian activist. She's very active in promoting the Palestinian cause. But when she goes to the West Bank and she meets with Palestinians, she's very acutely embarrassed by her ancestry. So her attitude towards Lloyd George is ambivalent: admiration for his radicalism on the one hand, and deep disappointment and anger for the support that he gave to Zionism and for the Balfour Declaration in particular.
Thank you. Can I ask you about the Nakba in 1948? Now, Israel presents a narrative that it was largely done through mass migration for immigration and voluntary dispersal of the Palestinians. What's the truth behind that episode?
There is the Master Zionist narrative, which says that in 1947 the UN voted for the partition of Palestine into two states, one Arab, one Jewish. The Arabs rejected partition and went to war to frustrate partition, and they were defeated in that war. And in the course of the war, the Palestinians left Palestine. They left on orders from above, and in the expectation of a triumphal return. So Israel is not responsible for the Palestinian refugee problem. 750,000 Palestinians became refugees, not a small number, more than half the population. And I'm a new historian, so-called new historian.
Yeah.
The three original new historians are Benny Morris, Ilan Pape, and myself. And in 1988, the three of us published books on what happened in 1948. Ilan Pape's book challenges the Zionist claim that towards the end of the mandate, Britain's aim was to frustrate the birth of a Jewish state, that Britain armed and incited its Arab allies to invade Palestine upon end of the mandate and frustrate the birth of a Jewish state. Ilan Pape shows that Britain's real aim was to frustrate the birth of a Palestinian state. So there is a case against Britain at the end of the mandate, but not that it tried to prevent the birth of a Jewish state, but that it succeeded in preventing the birth, aborting the birth of the Palestinian state. Benny Morris wrote The Birth of the Palestinian Refugee Problem, 1947 and 1949. This book is based on meticulous research in the Israeli archives. And the conclusion is that there are many reasons for the Palestinian exodus, but the main reason was Jewish economic, political, military, and psychological pressure. In other words, the refugee problem had many causes, but the main cause was Israeli actions. And there are many, many examples there of expulsion of Palestinians. It wasn't voluntary. So the Zionist narrative is that the Palestinians left, and Benny Morris shows that they didn't leave of their own accord, that they were pushed out. I would actually use the phrase ethnic cleansing. There was no Zionist master plan for the expulsion of the Palestinians, but there was a very definite aim of getting rid of as many Palestinians as possible. And if you look at the outcome, regardless of the intentions, the outcome is that 750,000 Palestinians became refugees, and the name Palestine was wiped off the map. The term ethnic cleansing didn't exist then, but I think it applies. And I agree with Ilan Pape, who wrote another book, which is called The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. That is the Nakba. My own book was called Collusion Across the Jordan. King Abdullah, the Zionist Movement, and the Partition of Palestine. And in this book, I advance a main thesis, which is that by 1947, King Abdullah of Jordan and the Jewish Agency reached a tacit agreement to divide Palestine not into an Arab state and a Jewish state, but to divide Palestine between themselves at the expense of the Palestinians. And this was indeed the outcome of the 1948 war. King Abdullah's army invaded Palestine, captured the West Bank, the heartland of what was to be the Palestinian state, and later incorporated into his kingdom, and Israel extended its borders beyond those granted by the UN Carter Conference. the losers were the Palestinians, and they were left out in the cold. So my book upturns the whole historiography of the Arab-Israeli conflict in the first half of the 20th century. The conventional narrative is that it was a straightforward bipolar conflict between Jews on the one hand and all the Arab world on the other hand. Whereas I argue that below the surface, the real lineup was between Hashemite rulers of Jordan and Zionists on the one hand, against the Palestinians and Arab nationalists on the other hand. So this is, in a nutshell, the new history. My colleagues and I, between us, launched a frontal attack on all the myths that have come to surround the birth of Israel and the first Arab-Israeli war.
When we discuss the current slaughter, I suppose we can call it that, of Gazans, it's now been 3 months, and it's clear to you and I that there is a form of ethnic cleansing taking place similar to that of the Nakba in 1948. I want to ask you a question about history and historians. I mean, are you confident that in the future, historians will look back and see these events in the same way you and I see them? I suppose I'm asking the question, is all history essentially a politicized version of history?
No. There is a difference between good history and bad history. And bad history is the history with a political axe to grind, where the agenda dominates the research and the writing. And good history is more detached, more objective history. But you're right in saying that the historian doesn't operate in a vacuum. The historian is a member of his society. The historian addresses the questions that are current at the time of writing. And I have no way of knowing how future historians would look back on what's happening in Gaza today.
Yeah.
But I am confident on the basis of what I know that what is unfolding in front of our eyes today is ethnic cleansing, the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. And I would go further and say we're also seeing the beginning of what might be called genocide. Genocide is much more extreme than ethnic cleansing. For the ethnic cleansing, we have all the evidence that Israel has ordered the Palestinians to move from north to the south of the Strip. There are 2.3 million residents in Gaza. 1.9 million have already been displaced, sometimes a second time. And some of the Palestinians who have obeyed Israeli orders are then bombed by Israeli airstrikes. The forcible movement, the forcible coercion of civilians to move from their homes is a war crime.
Yeah.
So Israel is committing war crimes already by the orders, by the displacement of the Palestinians within the Gaza Strip. But Israeli ambition doesn't end there. The Israeli ambition is to get rid of as many of the Palestinians in Gaza as possible. Benjamin Netanyahu, in an address to the nation, said, "We are fighting our second war of independence." This is complete nonsense. It's preposterous. No one is threatening Israel's independence. That's not the issue. And behind his words, I see a veiled threat that the first war of independence was accompanied by the Nakba, and this war of independence, as he sees it, will be accompanied by another Nakba. And some Israeli leaders are actually talking about the second Nakba, and some of them are saying the scale of the second Nakba is going to be bigger. This is not just speculation on my part. A document of the Israeli Ministry of Intelligence dated 13 October came to light, and it has a plan for the depopulation of Gaza, for pushing a large number of the Palestinians from Gaza into northern Sinai, into Egyptian territory. Obviously, Egypt is strongly opposed to any such move, but that is an Israeli ambition. And what we are noticing now is very disturbing, genocidal rhetoric. I think there is no precedent for this kind of open genocidal rhetoric that we are seeing today. People don't usually advertise their intention to carry out genocide. They try to hide it, whereas Israeli leaders, from top to bottom, are issuing extraordinary statements. Like President Herzog says there are no innocent people in Gaza. Well, I beg to differ. Israel has killed over 22,000 people, nearly 10,000 children. 2/3 of the death toll are women and children. They are innocent, and yet more and more Israeli leaders are demonizing the Palestinians, calling for their expulsion, calling openly for ethnic cleansing. One rabbi said that Israel should drop an atomic bomb on Gaza. And this worries me a great deal, the genocidal rhetoric, because usually demonizing the enemy leads or justifies extermination and genocide. So this is not just loose talk. It's very serious dehumanizing, not just of Hamas, but of the entire Palestinian people.
In recent weeks and months, there's been a ferocious debate here in the West about context. I suppose it's what you call good history. Now, the 7th of October is a hotly debated topic, and of course, much of what Israel has done has been justified by the 7th of October. The detractors, those who argue against Israel's case, would suggest that there is a context to the violence of the 7th of October. How important is it for us to explore that context? And what is the context behind what happened on the 7th of October?
The 7th of October Hamas attack on Israel was vicious, was traumatic, and it involved the killing of 1,200 Israelis, mostly civilians, and taking as hostages 240 others. And it was an attack on Israel, not through firing rockets on Israeli territory, but for the first time, it was a ground attack on settlements, kibbutz around Gaza, and on a music festival, which about 250 participants in the festival were killed. So it was a horrific attack on Israel, and I denounced it. But it didn't happen in a vacuum. There was a history behind it, and we won't understand why it happened unless we understand the context. And the context is one of 56 years of Israeli occupation. And this is the most prolonged and brutal occupation, military occupation of modern times. Israelis were utterly shocked and horrified by the Hamas attack, and Israeli society became unhinged by the scale and ferocity of this attack. But Palestinians have, on the West Bank and Gaza, have been living under Israeli occupation for 56 years. They've been subjected to horrific conditions, to daily violations of the basic human rights and oppression. And even after Israel withdrew unilaterally from Gaza in 2005, it didn't give the Gazans freedom as it claims. It put them in an open-air prison and imposed a blockade on Gaza long before this conflict in Gaza, long before the outbreak of the current round of fighting in Gaza. So Israel is an oppressive colonial power, and there is Palestinian resistance, naturally. The Palestinian Authority in Ramallah doesn't represent any resistance. It has become the subcontractor for Israeli security. That is why it lacks legitimacy. Whereas Hamas is the only body which represents real resistance, national resistance to the Israeli occupation. And another element in the context was Netanyahu saying to the Israeli people, the Palestinians are finished, the Palestinians are defeated. We can do whatever we like on the West Bank, whatever we like, and we can continue to expand settlements and put people in prison without charge. As for Gaza, it's contained within the prison. And on the 7th of October, the prison inmates broke out of the prison. So that's the context. And there is one other reason for the Hamas attack on the 7th of October, and that is that some Arab countries have betrayed the Palestinians. In March 2002, there was an Arab League summit meeting in Beirut, and it adopted what became known as the Arab Peace Initiative. And the Arab Peace Initiative offers Israel full peace and normalization with all 22 members of the Arab League in return for an end of occupation and a Palestinian state on the West Bank and Gaza with a capital city in East Jerusalem. This is the deal of the century. This is what Israel had always been asking for before 1967, and yet Israel ignored the Arab Peace Initiative and continues to ignore it and to reject it to this day. In 2020, 4 Arab countries signed the so-called Abraham Accords with Israel. They're the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan. They completely abandoned the Arab Peace Initiative. They made peace with Israel on Netanyahu's terms, which is peace for peace rather than land for peace. So Israel didn't have to pay any price in terms of concessions to the Palestinians or Palestinian independence to get these 4 agreements. And there was strong American pressure on Saudi Arabia to join the circle of the Abraham Accords. And negotiations were far advanced, and it was a matter of weeks before Saudi Arabia was going to sign an agreement with Israel. And that would have been a stab in the back to the Palestinians, and that would have been the end of any Arab support for Palestinian independence. And by launching this attack, Hamas forced Saudi Arabia to think again of whether they really want to go down this route. So the Hamas attack, for all its terrorist and brutal aspect, is still an assertion of Palestinian agency. The message was, we are still here, and Palestinian resistance under the leadership of Hamas is going to continue.
Can I ask you about internal Israeli dynamics? Now, there is a perception that a lot of what is happening in Gaza, be the sheer violence, the settler activity in the West Bank, is really down to the religious right and the coalition that has been mustered together by the Likud party, by Netanyahu. People like Smotrich and others are really inflaming the Palestinian territories for their own benefit. We did see last year, before this crisis, we did see mass demonstrations on the streets of Tel Aviv and elsewhere, suggesting that Israeli society is divided. How believable do you think the belief is, or the perception is, that if Netanyahu went, the attitude towards the Palestinians would be moderated?
There is the view that I don't share, that Netanyahu is a moderating force within his coalition, that there is the extreme, very extreme wing of the coalition, which consists of Jewish power led by Itamar Ben-Gvir,
Yes.
and religious Zionism led by Bezalel Smotrich. They are outright racists and Jewish supremacists. They don't try to conceal it. And they call openly for the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, not just of Gaza, but of the West Bank as well. And their aim, declared aim, is ethnic cleansing and the formal annexation of the West Bank. And Netanyahu is no moderate. Netanyahu is an extreme Jewish nationalist who hates Arabs and would like to get rid of the Arabs. His life mission is to defeat to defeat Palestinian nationalism, and he has declared repeatedly that there would be no Palestinian state on his watch. And now that the war in Gaza has been going on for 3 months, the Americans are beginning to put pressure on him to agree to the day after, a political plan for the day after. And the Americans would like to bring the Palestinian Authority back into Gaza, to rule Gaza. And this is, of course, not acceptable to the people in Gaza, to impose on them the Palestinian Authority on the back of Israeli tanks. That's a complete non-starter. So Netanyahu doesn't have any political plan for the day after. His war aim is to destroy Hamas, which is impossible to achieve, and indefinite Israeli security control of Gaza. But that leaves open the question of who will govern Gaza. So the present government, Netanyahu included, make for what is the most ultra-right the most nationalistic, the most openly racist, and openly homophobic government in Israel's history. And also, this government is dominated by the settlers, the settler lobby, to a greater extent than any previous Israeli government. So one problem is the Israeli occupation of the West Bank, and another problem is that the settlers now occupy the Israeli government. They are the government and they make policy. And it's a terrifying prospect.
How about the liberals and the left in Israel? Would we find a kinder policy towards the Palestinians if they were offered power?
There was a mass protest against Netanyahu and his judicial reform program.
Yeah.
The aim of that program was to reduce the powers of the Supreme Court. I know that the Supreme Court would rule as illegal some of the measures that they want to implement, like the annexation of the West Bank.
Yeah.
But this is also an attack, the reform is also an attack on Israeli democracy, because it reduces the rights of Israeli citizens and freedom of speech. So those huge protests against Netanyahu and the judicial reform. But once the attack of Hamas happened on the 7th of October, all the focus was changed to Gaza and to the hostages. And now Netanyahu has alienated most Israelis, and the protest is against him personally.
Yes.
Because he's held responsible for the collapse of security on the 7th of October. And it wasn't just one attack, but his whole policy built around the notion that the Palestinians have been defeated. His whole policy has collapsed. And he's held responsible, and there are protests against him. And he knows that once the fighting stops, the countdown to the end of his premiership will begin. So he's now fighting for political survival, because as long as he is prime minister, he cannot be tried, and he has pending 3 serious trials of corruption against him, and he knows that when he stops being prime minister, he will stand trial, and most probably he'll be convicted and he'll end up in prison. And the tragedy for Israel as a whole is that this uniquely selfish and terrible man is now prolonging the war and the carnage and the destruction in Gaza for his own selfish ends.
Can I ask you one final question? And it's really about the UK political scene. You're a Labour Party member, and it seems to me that the leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer, has probably gone even further than the Conservatives in defending Israel's right to defend itself and to enact revenge upon the Gazans. How do you reflect on the current Labour Party position?
So Keir Starmer is one example of a wider phenomenon, which is Western hypocrisy on Israel-Palestine. And you see that hypocrisy in the American administration during this conflict in Gaza. It's America which has stopped the ceasefire from taking place, and America is supplying Israel with war material. So America is not just complicit in Israeli war crimes, America is an active belligerent alongside Israel against the Palestinian people. most European countries are the same. The British government has always been one-sidedly pro-Israeli and totally indifferent to Palestinian rights. But Keir Starmer is an interesting example because he has declared himself to be an unconditional Zionist. That's an odd position for a politician to take. Surely, and he's a lawyer, he's a human rights lawyer, surely he should make his support for Israel conditional on Israel abiding by international law and Israel respecting human rights. But no, he gives Israel a free pass to do its worst. And he was interviewed during this current crisis, and he defended Israel, and he said that Israel has the right to defend itself. And the interviewer asked him, does Israel have the right to stop water and food and fuel and medical supplies to the civilian population of Gaza? And his reply was, Israel has the right to defend itself. He later tried to backtrack from that, but that's his basic position. Israel right or wrong, regardless of international law, regardless of the abuses, regardless of the war crimes, he's still an unconditional supporter of Israel. And one other thing about Sir Keir Starmer, he was asked, do you think Israel is an apartheid state? And he said no, he doesn't think so. But 4 major human rights organizations in the last 3 years have issued reports, detailed reports, all of which conclude that Israel is guilty of the international crime of apartheid. So it's completely preposterous for a British politician and a human rights advocate to be denying that Israel is an apartheid state.
Thank you very much. I mean, I'm struck by how razor sharp your memory is, Professor Abushalom. How do you keep your memory so sharp?
Well, I'm a historian, and you can't be a historian unless you have a good memory.
Yes.
But also, I'm old. I'm 78 years old. I've been a university teacher for 53 years. And knowledge is cumulative. So for the last 40 years or so, my main research interest has been the Arab-Israeli conflict. But I'm not an ivory tower historian. I'm interested in what's going on around me. And there is so much misinformation. And in the media today, so much misinformation about Hamas, about the Palestinians, about Israel. And I regard it as my duty to share my knowledge with the wider public, not just to write scholarly work for other scholars, but to try and reach a wider public, to educate them about the reality of this tragic conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. And I'm grateful to you for giving me this opportunity to speak to your audience.
Thank you very much. I'm really grateful for your time today. Thank you, Professor Abushalom.
Thank you.
Please remember to subscribe to our social media and YouTube channels, and head over to our website thinkingmuslim.com to sign up to my weekly newsletter. Jazakallah khair.
Okay, tapos na. Si Professor Abi mga suki, no? Saan ang salamin ko? Ayan. Okay. Ipagpatuloy natin ang programa. Okay, sandali lang, no?
Monster voice, female voice, male voice, lolly voice.
Okay, last na ito mga kababayan na meron ng research kagabi, no? Ang term po ginamit po ng leader po ng Israel. Okay, itong si Benjamin Netanyahu, no? And then sinagot po ng itong bansang Turkey, no? Okay, ang definition po ng Abi Melek. Salitang Hudyo, no? Okay, salitang Hebrew. Okay, binanggit po ng itong kasagsagan po ng gera po dyan sa Israel, no? Okay, sa definition po ng ito, Abimelech, salitang Hudyo, is formed from Hebrew words. Okay, ang meaning po ang Abi, meaning father, tatay. And Melech, salitang Hudyo, is king. Okay, king po ang ibig sabihin, no? Okay, so, and may be interpreted in a variety of ways, including a father, king. My father is king. Ang ibig sabihin, no? Or father of a king. Okay, in the Pentateuch, it is used as a title for kings in the land of Canaan. Okay, the land of Canaan sa Israel, mga suki, no? So, yon po ang kasaysayan. No? Iulitin ko lang. Abi means father, and then na isang word yun, Melech. Okay? Is formed from Hebrew words for father and king. Ibig sabihin po ng Abimelech. Okay. Spell natin ang ibig sabihin ng Abi, no? Abi, diretso. A, B-I, B as a boy, and Melech. M-E-L-E-C. Okay? Yun na po ang meaning niya, no? And may be interpreted in a variety of ways, including father and father or king, Okay, my father is a king. Okay, or father of a king. In the Pentateuch, okay, Pentateuch, okay, it is used as a title for kings in the land of Canaan, mga suki, no? So, nabanggit ito ng leader po ng okay, sa bakbakan dyan, mga suki, no? Okay. So, Hebrew word po, mga suki, mga kababayan, no? Bakit niya nabanggit yun? Anong ibig sabihin po, mga kababayan, no? Okay. Okay, pagpatuloy natin ang research natin, no? Okay, para alam po natin bakit yan nabanggit po sa gera na yan, no? Okay. Dito naman sa AI, dalawang pagkuhanan natin ng source, no? Sa AI, okay, chatbot, artificial intelligence, Abimelech is a biblical figure, no? Biblical figure. Okay. Mentioned in the book of Genesis, in the Old Testament. Okay, he is described as a son of Gideon. As a son of Gideon. And the Sememite, tama bang pronounce ko ng Sememite? Concubine. Okay, concubine. Concubine. Concubine ba o concubine? Concubine. Okay. The son of Gideon and the Sesemite of concubine. Ano bang ibig sabihin ng concubine, no? Okay, anak sa labas. And he became the king of Shechem. Shechem or Shechem. Shechem ata ito, no? Okay, Abimelech is known for his controversial rise to power. Okay, ang tao ito. And his turbulent relationship with his brothers. Okay, itong dinifine po ng artificial intelligence, no? After Gideon's death, yung tatay niya, Abimelech convinced the people of Shechem to support him as their ruler. Okay, contrary to his father's plan for his son to rule over all Israel, mga suki, mga kababayan, no? Kaya nga pala, nabanggit ito ni Benjamin Netanyahu dahil pag gusto na i-rule po, okay, kasama na po ang territory po ng itong Gaza, okay, kung maaari, at saka itong mga West Bank, mga kababayan, na? Okay. After, ulitin ko, no? After Gideon's death, Abimelech convinced the people of Shechem to support him as the ruler. Okay, contrary to his father's plan for his son to rule over all Israel, Abimelech then went on to kill all his brother po, mga sugi. Yun ang kasamaan ni Abimelech, na? On to kill all his brother exempt for one named Jotam. Jotam ba ito o Hotam? Okay, bahala ng pronunciation, no? Basta at least mabasa ko. Hotam ba o Jotam? Jotham. Okay, in order to eliminate any potential threat to his rule, okay, however, Abimelech's reign was short-lived and filled with the conflict, mga suki, no? Okay, filled with the conflict. Eventually, the people of Shechem turned against him, o naging kalaban niya, leading to an uprising led by a man named Gaal. Okay, named Gaal mga suki, no? Abimelech successfully defeated Gaal's forces, but during the battle, a woman threw a millstone, no? A woman threw a millstone from a tower that struck Abimelech's head and mortally wounded him. Babae po mga suki ang magbato po ng itong tower po, mga millstone from a tower. Ibig sabihin may bato mga suki, no? Okay, recognizing his imminent death, namatay si Abimelech. Abimelech instructed his armor bearer to kill him with a sword in order to avoid dying at the hand of a woman and avoid being remembered as a man killed by a woman. No? Okay, so the history of Abimelech served as a cautionary tale about power. Okay, mga sugi, no? Ambition and the consequences of violence and betrayal, mga sugi, mga kababayan, no? Okay, the consequences, ulitin ko, violence and betrayal. So, yan po ang ibig sabihin po, binanggit po ng leader ng Israel, si Benjamin Netanyahu, okay, sa salitang Hebrew, mga kababayan, no? So, yan po. Okay, kaya huwag kayo magkano matulog, mga suki, no? Okay, research tayo ng research para alam natin kung anong ibig sabihin po ng Abimelech. Okay, sa salitang Hebrew. Ayan. Okay. So, at least aware tayo sa mga nangyayari. Okay? Diyan po sa mga hindi kayaya, hindi po kabutihan ng resulta po ng digmaan yan, mga suki, no? Can you imagine 24,000 mahigit? Okay, ang namatay? Okay, versus sa mga declare nila ay 1,200 lang sa kanila. And then namatay po diyan sa mga Palestino, 24,000. And then mga sugatan po, okay, sa latest data, mga 60,000 mahigit, no? So, Abimelech. Ayan. Abimelech, mga suki, no? Okay, tapos na ang balita. At least makakontribute ako sa inyo. Okay, maalala nyo si Abdul Jaman Damahan, mawala man sa daigdig. Okay, sa kasipagan niya mag-research, alam nyo po ang Abimelech, mga kababayan, no? Okay. So, yan. Sa kasipagan niya mag-research, magbasa, mga 1 oras lang matulog sa gabi, 2 oras. Okay, yan po natutunan nyo, mga kababayan, no? Abimelech. Ayan. Okay, ayun po mga suki natin. Ayan.
Monster voice, female voice, male voice, lolly voice, monster voice,
Okay. Kaya matigil ang tunog ito, no? Ito, oh. Ayan. Gusto ko na matigil ito eh. Pero kung tuloy ang patayan, hindi po natin pwede itigil, no? Awesome! 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 Okay, term ng Abimelech po, i-dedicate ko po sa 98 barangays po dito sa Zamboanga City, no? Okay, at sa particular, okay, lagi ko pinapakinig ang programa. Okay, itong si Tia Karing. At saka itong programa, Ronda Brigada ba? Okay, ni, sino ba ito? Bing Rodriguez ba o Enriquez? Okay, mga suki, no? Bing Rodriguez na, Bing Enriquez. Okay, sa kanilang programa po mga kababayan, no? Public service, ang kanilang programa, no? Okay, dito po nagtatapos ng edition po ng programa natin sa umaga ito. Okay, sa Consolidated News natin po. Okay, magmula po. Okay, sa himpilan po ng platform po ng ADLSNTV News Online, no? Corporation. Okay, sinusuportahan po ng Mind the Global Food Line Corporation. Okay, dito po tapos po ang programa. Halo-halo special opinion balita, di ba pa? And then, ayan, serbisyo publiko tinig ng mamamayan at sa kasumbungan po ng mamamayan din. Okay, salamat. Okay, ay matalino po pag explain po ni Professor Abi Salain po isang Hudyo po mga kababayan, na? Ayan, isang Hudyo. Professor of international historian sa mga kababayan, na? Kasagsagan po ng kasaysayan po. Okay, ng itong bansang Gaza. Okay. Bansang Gaza mga suki, no? Okay. Hindi ata Gaza eh. Okay, city ng Gaza, no? Gaza, cruel Zionism, past and present. Okay, with Palestine mga suki, mga kabayan, no? Okay. So, paalam tayo. At least may natutunan tayo kahit paano. Dito po sa programa natin sa umagang ito. Word po ng Abimelech. Ayan. Okay, ang programa natin, wala tayong masamang tinapay sa kapwa. Kahit ano man gagawin natin, walang masama, no? At saka walang intention po ay mapasama ang tao, no? Ang purpose natin ma-educate, okay, ang taong mundo, mga kababayan. Okay, lahat na para ma-educate na tayo, no? Okay, paalam ako, babalik ako mamayang hapon kung kaya pa magprograma, kung meron pa internet. Okay, this has been Abs Damahan lamang po sa umagang ito, mga kababayan, no? Okay, mali ang ano. This has been Abs Damahan lamang, okay, sa umagang ito. Bye-bye na. Okay, kita-kita tayo muli mamayang hapon, mga kababayan, no? So, bye-bye na.
Ang station din ay tumatalay sa may subang kasalukuyan at napapanahon. Matalika, matatinong komentaryo at matalika ang programa ay patas sa lahat. Walang pilihan, walang kinakampihan, at walang pinapamigan ang programa ito. Ang programa ito ay public service sa kapamilan at trabaho lamang.